I was first reading Murray Rothbard's Ethics of Liberty, talked about the ethics of child starvation, I said to myself,
I think there's a difference between authoritarianism and healthy gatekeeping.
Many anarchists have actually gone woke.
I would rather die being a good guy than live being the bad guy.
If you want to commit self-slaughter,
you are in part responsible for that future reduction of my liberty. You get him elected and he drone bombs some kids in a school.
Hey, you know what? Gandhi was a little bitch.
Greetings, beautiful people. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith. Today's guest, really cool guy. You've seen him everywhere. He's the host of Wake Up America. He's been on Glenn Beck's show. He ran for president of the Libertarian Party against Bill Weld in 2016, which we can certainly talk about. His senatorial Facebook page was taken down in 2018. His senatorial campaign Facebook page was taken down in 2018 because he was giving away guns to teach lessons about self-defense against his competitors. In 2007, I didn't know this, he was going boxcar to boxcar on a subway reading Ron Paul's speeches to subway passengers. So this guy goes back in terms of libertarian activism. I'm looking forward to talking to him. Let's get into it.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Austin Petersen, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Doing great, man. Thanks a lot for having me on your show today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. The music is never going to stop. Hold on. This is my bad. There we go. It's so cool to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I followed you before I was even on Twitter. Back when I was involved with the Libertarian Party, I did a not governor campaign for the state of Texas, and I was watching you go along. And you know, I had criticisms that we can get into or not, but it's kind of like old news at this point. There's so much for us to talk about. This was a really hard show for me to put together sort of a timeline of the conversation for, but this is an anarchist channel, an anarcho-capitalist audience, and so I want to start there. You consider yourself a minarchist, correct me if I'm wrong. Why do you find that that is the correct position for you?
Sure. Well, my belief in minarchism began, I flirted with anarchism for a brief period, excuse me, back when I was first reading Murray Rothbard's Ethics of Liberty. And I think once I had read the chapter where Murray Rothbard talked about the ethics of child starvation, I said to myself, okay, well, I think at that point I can say safely that I am perfectly comfortable with the radical position of limiting a government to the absolute protection of children, and adults can do as they please. And remember, I did get booed when I ran for president for saying you shouldn't be able to sell heroin to kids. I still think adults should be allowed to do heroin if they desire. I really would strenuously urge that they do not. And you're probably not going to get that accomplished if you don't like actively enforce other violent laws, like violent crimes laws, which unfortunately, I think the state of Oregon is walking back their drug laws because they don't enforce laws against actual violent crimes. So everybody's like, it's the drugs, it's the drugs. So, you know, as long as kids are protected in society, if you're not protecting children, then I don't think it's a very useful philosophy, because I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess. It's just that little thing in there right there. That's just my little niggling doubts that I have. But I like anarcho-capitalists like Javier Milei and others. I take a lot of inspiration from Walter Block and from Murray Rothbard, and you know, I take a lot of inspiration from Ayn Rand, but I don't agree with anybody 100% on things. I change my mind on things day to day. I mean, I feel comfortable, you know, with the idea of a limited constitutional republic. You know, that's my lane, and I'm sticking to it.
This will be a fun conversation because I agree with you on a lot of your criticisms of preeminent, prominent, common libertarian anarcho-capitalist theology, let's say. Rothbard's take on kids, I have the quote. because I put this in my notes for a different show. I have it ready. Quote, applying our theory to parents and children. This means that a parent does not have the right to aggress against his children, but also that the parent should not have a legal obligation to feed, clothe, or educate his children, since such obligations would entail positive acts coerced upon the parent and depriving the parent of his rights. The parent, therefore, may not murder or mutilate his child. Thanks for that, Rothbard. And the law properly outlaws a parent from doing so, but the parent should have the legal right not to feed the child, i.e., to allow it to die. The law, therefore, may not properly compel the parent to feed a child or to keep it alive. I mean, I agree that is a terrible take. And just to give you my background on it, we did like a 3.5 hour long live stream where we read the entirety of Ethics of Liberty, and we really went hard on 2 points: the foundation of his philosophy being based in man's nature as some kind of objective morality, and then we spent like 45 minutes just deconstructing these terrible takes on the responsibility of the parent. When you choose to create a human in a state of peril, you put them in that situation, you are voluntarily taking upon yourself a positive obligation to make sure that that being that you created has food and clothing and safety and education and everything it needs to lead a good life. So Rothbard's take on that especially is not, I don't think, representative of a lot of anarcho-capitalist views. So I'm with you on
I agree.
that.
And I hear a lot of anarchists, say that, and you know, you don't have to. Even Murray Rothbard didn't agree with Murray Rothbard at times, and he got criticized. One time in his later life, a student approached him and said, you know, like, you're not a very good Rothbardian, and he laughed about that and was like, it's true. I mean, Murray Rothbard, you know, he was an activist as well, and he spent his time trying to get leftist Antifa type people at the time, Maoists, to build a coalition. And then when he couldn't do that, he went to the paleo conservatives and tried to build a coalition with the Pat Buchananites. Now, if he had just lived until today, he would probably be very excited to see where that strategy has lent fruit, because at the time today, I think he would love Donald Trump, because I think that very much is sort of like that has borne fruit, if you will, that attempt to coalition from Murray Rothbard. But I mean, I also just think, like, in general, from a philosophical perspective, it's problematic to make try and boil down all human interactions into the question of aggression. And I think that it also had it has warped the libertarian movement, specifically in the United States, not outside the United States. But this is a uniquely American libertarian problem, that this overemphasis on looking at everything into aggression and boiling everything down into aggression, rather than like a private property argument, it has warped our perception of things like foreign policy, where we have, I think many anarchists have gone, or anarcho-capitalists have actually gone woke, in the sense that they look at foreign policies as a lens of aggression, and in doing so, the left, which believes that there are oppressors and oppressed, and all relationships flow through who is oppressing one person, who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed, right? We see this in our school and our public education system. It naturally, that's why I think anarcho-capitalists in the United States find common cause with Marxists when it comes to foreign policy, because the boiling down of all human interactions into who's aggressing against who, I think, is fallacious. So the house is built upon sand to a large extent, because not every interaction between humans, it can be boiled down to a question of aggression. Can many of them? Sure, but I think it you know, if your premise is flawed, then typically most of the outcomes of that flawed premise will be flawed as well. I mean, you can sometimes, blind squirrels will find a nut, but I think that, you know, there's a massive difference between the foreign policy of an anarcho-capitalist like Javier Milei and anarcho-capital. You know, pick any prominent anarcho-capitalist in the United States, typically, other than, say, Walter Block, and they will be completely in opposition to what Javier Milei's foreign policy will be. And that has a lot to do with...
Can you give me a couple examples for us to sort of talk through?
Sure. Well, Javier Milei's pro-Israel. Javier Milei is pro-United States. Javier Milei took 2 of his Russian helicopters and donated them to Ukraine. He sees Russian aggression as a violation of the international law, and he sees it as a violation of morality. And so my view, I'm decidedly pro-West. I see the West is not perfect. The United States intervenes far too much. Pax Americana definitely needs to be revisited. I think we could spend less money on our military, but I still think military, and in order to protect ourselves from Chinese communist aggression. And in order for us to have that means that we're going to have to spend some tax dollars, and that means that you're going to have to tax in some sense. And then you're going to have to get into the question of, is taxation? Well, yes, it is. But then you're going to have to ask the question of, when is it okay to do small harms in order to achieve larger goods? So because Thomas Sowell, I say this all the time, he very accurately noted that life is not, there are no solutions in life. There are only trade-offs. Right? It's kind of like, he used this in the context of talking about the polio vaccine, because he said that while millions of lives were absolutely saved with the issuance of the polio vaccine, he said there were, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people who had a negative impact. Some of them even died as a result of the polio vaccine because they were allergic to it and they had a negative reaction to it, which just goes to show that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So whether it's a view of foreign policy or a view of children and the rights of children and selling heroin to fighters, right? Everything is going to boil down to a trade-off, right? And so what are you getting for what you have to give? I mean, that's just reality. And so Javier Milei's view of anarcho-capitalist foreign policy is a very realist-based worldview. Argentina doesn't have a massive military. Therefore, whenever Iran or Russia or China, has an incursion into Argentine affairs, because they don't have a CIA or an SA to protect them, if there's an act of terrorism, which there has been in the past, they're far more damaged by that. We're fat, lazy, sloppy, well-fed, well-cheeseburgered American anarcho-capitalists and libertarians who sleep, under the defensive umbrella of a military-industrial complex that operates in tandem with government agencies who, whether we hate them or not, protect us at night. We sleep under the cloak, the umbrella of the nuclear triad, intercontinental ballistic missiles, B-2 bombers, and other deliveries, and nuclear submarines. And Argentines don't have that. So they have reason to be afraid and to want to have, the ability to build a national defense. And they want to ally with the West because we've got nukes. And we know, and they know that we're the good guys, and we're not going to go out there and, we're not going to start, wars, nuclear wars, no matter what people might say. I think Javier Milei sees the U.S. as the good guys, as being generally pro-capitalism compared to Russia or China, and Israel as being the only country in the Middle East that elects its leaders and gives women rights. So he sees that as a step in the right direction. He probably has a lot of the same criticisms that Ancaps do about American foreign policy and all that, but he's an Argentine citizen said this to me yesterday. It really made me think. He goes, because I was taking some of the criticisms of Javier Milei from Ancaps and posing it to this economist who's an expert on Argentine politics. And we were having this conversation, and a commenter from Argentina said, "We did not elect Javier Milei so that he could fulfill every libertarian's dreams of what a libertarian should be doing. We elected Javier Milei to get us out of poverty, out of crushing debt, to save us from socialism to protect us, from China, who go illegally into our fishing waters and steal our fish and take food from our mouths. We elected Javier Milei to make our country better off, to make Argentina, to get us out of a 60% poverty rate. And I mean, when we can go down the street and get food anytime we want without a giant stack of bills in order to pay for our food, like, we don't understand like what it's like to be in a desperate situation like these people are. So it's like, we have the luxury of arguing over whether we should give heroin to 5-year-olds, and they don't have that luxury down there. So like, I think just a little bit of scope would be very helpful for us here in the United States.
I agree with a lot of what you said. It sounded like some of your criticisms were targeting specifically like the non-aggression principle, which we can talk about. I don't have a lot of... I see it as a headline or sort of a bumper sticker version of like a much deeper philosophy that handles a lot of the people. Like, there's a lot of issues. If you just take the sentence, "Thou shalt not initiate the use of force," there's holes there, that there's things that aren't covered. There's rough edges that aren't addressed, and I think when people when people think of it as like the start and end of a philosophy, that's not it. It's the title. It's the title on the top of the page, and then you have to go and read the philosophy, and you have to study the principles that back that up and that instantiate that. I don't. I ran for not governor of Texas. I as an anarcho-capitalist, as long as you run your campaign in a way that is targeted at merely and only reducing the harms and coercions of government, I don't see a conflict there. Milei I agree with what I've seen him do somebody might tell me about something I'm not familiar with yet, but so far everything I'm seeing him do is good. Like, he's like, why wouldn't you want to slice off all of these terrible government institutions and balance the budget? Like, those are all steps on the way towards more liberty. And I haven't seen him take any regressive steps that moves people away from liberty and personal consent and property, which, by the way, is I see as the fundamental libertarian principles. I see individual consent and individual property, and if we focus on those more than just like a one sentence nap as some kind of all overarching guiding principle, we get a lot farther.
Think about it from a perspective. I mean, how hyper focused like the libertarian movement is on that, philosophical principle, and ask yourself, like, are we in a movement of people who want limited government, or are we in a cult? Right? Because it has a religious aspect to it, right? It is like revered. If you question it, right, and then people have emotional responses to that. Right? Just like you're telling people, like, it's like walking into church and telling people that Jesus was not the Son of God, right? Like, and if you're in a group of people who are, self-avowed free thinkers, like, there really shouldn't be anything that isn't up for debate, right? There really should be, like, everything should be allowed to be like mulled over or questioned and reconstituted and refined, because as man is imperfect, so are our philosophies, right? So are our understandings of the world. We have to refine them as new information comes in. And I really love Ralph Waldo Emerson. I quote him every time I feel like I turn around, because in his essay on self-reliance, he talks about, right, speak what you believe, in hard words today, though it may contradict everything that you said yesterday, even if that confuses people, because every great and pure individual on this planet has been confusing, and for example, in that essay, he's talking about this concept of consistency. In my younger days, back when I was reading Ron Paul speeches on the subway in New York City, I highly valued the concept of consistency, because Ron Paul was consistent. And that consistency I saw as a virtue, right? He's always been consistent. That is a virtue. But there's an antecedent to that, which is that Bernie Sanders is very consistent, and he's consistently wrong, right? But like there's what Ralph Waldo Emerson called a foolish consistency, right? And he called it a tool of little statesmen and philosophers divine. With consistency, a great mind has very little to do, right? If there's a Bible of libertarianism, let's say that the Ethics of Liberty is the Bible, or the Constitution of Liberty is the Bible. Well, then, if there's a Bible of libertarianism, then it's not a philosophy, it's more like a cult, like I'm kind of saying. Then we'll have a Bible of libertarianism, and therefore, whenever there's a problem in the world or anything that needs to be solved, we can always just refer back to the Bible and say, well, here's the solution, right? Because God, this is the word of God, and therefore it is infallible, and thus it can be applied to every single situation. People look at the non-aggression principle in much the same way, where it is infallible, or some people use the term axiomatic. They call it an axiom, which means that it's self-evident and it cannot therefore be questioned. But I defy that the desire to make it an axiom, because it's clearly fallible with plenty of the things that you and I just have already identified. So is it up for debate? Is it up for question? Or is there an infallible word of God that is handed down from us that can possibly be applied to every single situation? I don't think there is. I think that I grow older, I grow more unorthodox in my approach rather than orthodoxy. I'm the polar opposite of this new like authoritarian, dissident right movement that finds solace in orthodoxy. Right. And like to an extent, the libertarian movement in the United States sort of mirrors it with their own clubs and cliques. They're not, Catholic Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, whatever you want to call it, but they can be very authoritarian in the enforcement of libertarian orthodoxy, I find. Which
like what? Where's the authoritarianism in the orthodoxy?
That to say that the non-aggression principle is axiomatic and therefore cannot be questioned, I think is a fairly authoritarian way of looking at things.
I see two different versions of your argument. I see one which says that there are cultists around the nap, and I'm sorry if you can hear them mowing. They literally always mow their grass right when I start recording.
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. There's people that are, like you said, they're emotionally reactive when you question the nap, rather than engaging with the argument and meeting out the details and refining our philosophy and our principles. I agree with you there. But outside of the debate about the validity of the nap, once we have a set of principles, those should be adhered to. I don't see any validity to the concept of like a necessary evil. I would never accept a small harm, a small aggression. I would not. What it means to be principled to me is I'm willing to self-sacrifice if it means preventing other people from being harmed by me.
Well, yeah, but don't force that on me. Don't force that belief on me. That's fine. If you want to commit self-slaughter and you want to commit suicide, well, it is the end result of what you just said. So, for example, you wouldn't even take advantage of using someone's private property to save your own life in the event of a storm. Sure. So you're on a boat, you're in the boat, you're in the ocean, somebody's private property, they don't want to allow you to dock there, but if you don't, then the hurricane's going to take you out to sea and you're going to die. Well, you'd have to do a small harm. You'd have to take up their dock space and lash yourself to their dock in order to do that. And, there are court cases in the United States about that. There's things called safe harbor laws that allow you to act in defense of your own life, to moor yourself to someone else's property or their dock. Murray Rothbard used it in a way where if you were falling off of a building and you could grab onto somebody's window sill and hold on to it, and it's their private property, could they throw you off of it? Like if somebody takes you up into a hot air balloon and decides that they don't want you there anymore, can they throw you out of the hot air balloon? Right? It's, same thing with like abortion, right? And the rights of children. That's why, Walter Block has this philosophy of, evictionism when it comes to abortion. But
There's a lot.
There's one last thing.
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
I forget.
Yeah.
The Stalinist purge squads that operate 24/7, seeking any heresy on libertarian views, operate in a very authoritarian fashion. They are always on the hunt for any heresy from libertarian orthodoxy. Now, the leaders of libertarianism, they are allowed some heresies on orthodoxy, right? If open borders or immigration, if we like them enough and they have enough followers online, then the leadership is allowed heresy. But if you don't have enough Twitter followers, if you don't have enough people following you online, if you're not a high priest of libertarianism, then you will be purged from the liberty movement for any perceived act of heresy. That is authoritarian. It's authoritarianism can exist in a cultural form. It's not just about what the government does. If your neighbors are snitching on you, right, they're acting in an authoritarian manner. If they're ratting you out for whatever reason, right? So libertarianism in the United States has an authoritarian tinge to it, because it operates in a Stalinist fashion, seeking out people who are not adhering to whatever is the standard that is set for them at that moment. Which is ironically the Sons of Liberty that were in the United States one of the reasons we got the Constitution is because the Sons of Liberty and other anarchist groups in the United States were just going around overthrowing local governments on the East Coast of the United States and just setting up their own rules and laws and just changing them there at the drop of a hat. And that was one of the reasons why they wanted to write the Constitution, because they're like, we're going to have to set up like a permanent set of rules here, because we got anarchists going up and down the East Coast of the United States, just overthrowing governments everywhere they go. And so it's like, you can't have people constantly operating on a purge mentality and have any kind of semblance of order or stability in order to accomplish common goals in a culture or a society. It's just, it doesn't work, and it leads to more chaos, and not the good kind of chaos, right? The bad kind of chaos. So
I think
I'm done filibustering.
No, there's like 5 things that we could make a whole podcast out of in what you just said. So
Sure,
I think there's a difference between authoritarianism and healthy gatekeeping. I think the Libertarian Party has failed on gatekeeping over the past 10 years to the point where the communists, the outright commies, were influencing the party to a absurd degree. And I think bringing back gatekeeping around the principles of the primacy of consent and property rights is what we definitely need more of. And if somebody starts calling themselves a libertarian and then calling for things that conflict with personal or individual consent and property, they need to be gate kept out. And I don't see that gatekeeping as authoritarian. I think I see it as keeping the group on track. If anybody in the world can join a party and start affecting and changing and stretching the definition of libertarianism, then the word becomes meaningless. It becomes nebulous, and it doesn't stand for anything, and it becomes a normal, bland, boring BS perverted political party.
But that's what the gatekeeping has been. Trust me, I don't think the gatekeeping has been too little. I think it's been a lot, right? And at this point in time, looking at the Libertarian Party, I mean, it's a completely different question, right? To party politics are a very different matter from like the philosophy itself. So it's important, I think, to try and wrest away those understandings, right? So libertarianism itself, small L, and then the party. It's like the party has a completely different set of problems. But the liberty movement itself in the United States, decaying, and it's not because there's been too little gatekeeping, right? It's not because anybody wants to call themselves. Nobody wants to call themselves a libertarian, dude. Like, it's not like you're not making friends in politics or in your community by telling anybody you're a libertarian. Other libertarians don't even like you if you tell them you're a libertarian. Okay, so it's not like you're dying to try and keep away all these commies and lefties who are trying to be libertarians. They obviously don't want to be called libertarians. They don't want anything to do with libertarians. Right-wingers don't want anything to do with libertarians for the most part. It's not like that. It's very different. And then the libertarian question. That in itself, I mean, I learned pragmatism from Garrison and Bill Weld, right? They taught me the value of compromise, right? And I ran in a very naive fashion that, right, that I could bring like as damn near close up as pure a version of libertarianism to the people on a presidential ballot in 2016. And I was taught by the Libertarian Party that I really learned a thing or two about pragmatism, about making compromises in order to advance a political viewpoint, and that came straight from the Gary Johnson Weld forces, who taught me a thing or two about politics. They beat me, and I realized that yes, there are compromises that have to be made in order to win an election, which is what we're talking about here. We're not advancing ideas now. We're talking about winning an election and getting your ideas across and getting them out to the main public. I learned a thing or two about electoral politics from my defeats. And what I realized is, if you're going to compromise your principles to an extent in order to advance some ideals in electoral politics, why would you compromise your principles or values for a limp noodle like Gary Johnson, right, or Bill Weld, right? I have to compromise. Like I this last Saturday went to my Republican Party caucus and joined up on a delegate slate, and I am now a committed delegate for Donald Trump here in the state of Missouri. So, in theory, I could go to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee and cast my vote for Donald Trump for president of the United States, and potentially even become an elector here in the state of Missouri and to pledge to vote for Donald Trump. So I'm compromising, like I learned from Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. If you're going to compromise, why compromise for people like Bill Weld or Gary Johnson or the Libertarian Party that has no interest in actually advancing ideas? The Libertarian Party has all the same problems that the major party does without the effect of actually winning. Like, I'm getting ready to be a part of the winning team, and I got to tell you, as sellout as that sounds, it's actually kind of fun. I'm kind of excited that I'm going to be a part of the winning team. If Donald Trump wins this fall, I'm excited to be a part. I want actually. Winning my race to be a delegate this last Saturday, winning that vote. That's the first time I've ever won an election in my life. I'm really excited about that. And you know what? Here's the thing. I had to actually make friends in my real life community of people where I live. I had to actually know the people in the community who, when I stood up to be counted, to be voted for as a delegate, people who had to know my face, know who I am, know where I live. They're like, oh, that's Austin Petersen, who lives over at Bridlesburg. He's a radio show host. Everybody likes him. He's a libertarian, but he's cool. He's pledged to vote for Donald Trump, and we're going to vote for him because he's a nice young man with a wife and a child on the way, right? And that's politics. I had to earn the trust of this community of people in order for them to delegate to me as a delegate, the being their elected representative to go to a convention, a state convention. And since we live in a system where we elect representatives, I'm acting as a representative of the citizens of my county to that thing. And that's, call it democracy in a republic, call it what you will. But it's not a perfect system, but it's not a bad system. Honestly, it's not the worst system out there. And this it's the yeoman's work of politics that I think a lot of libertarians eschew. And I have in the past. I eschewed it. Right, I went for the top spot. But we're just talking about electoral politics here. We're not talking about philosophy. We're not talking about non-aggression principle. We're talking about the actual bare bones work of politics, actual politics, making friends, earning the trust of your community, of the people who you would actually seek to represent. This is not what a lot of libertarians do, right? They don't actually go out into their community, get on a first name basis with their neighbors, and then ask to represent them, in an electoral fashion. And so I think, the problem with the Libertarian Party is that it doesn't have that kind of an outreach program. It's not operating in that sort of real life, know your neighbor political system. It's just, let's talk about the philosophy, and maybe the people who are in office are so bad that we might get enough votes to get ballot access next time. That's just the Libertarian Party's question. The philosophical question is another thing entirely.
Well, let me address that first. Politics is the antithesis of principle. You made the exact case, and I learned this from my dipping my toe into it. You cannot be principled and be a politician. You cannot gain the trust of your neighbors to the point where they allow you to be their representative and have your principles. You cannot have both. Those are mutually exclusive terms. You had to compromise. Supporting Trump, my God. So let's say you help him win, and he wins, and then he does something else like a bump stock ban or worse, and which reduces my liberty. You are in part responsible for that future reduction of my liberty when that happens. So I'll be calling you, and we'll have you back on the podcast, and maybe we can blame you for that if and when he wins.
And then when you go to the gas pump, yes, but then I expect you will also be saying thank you when you're paying lower gas prices. So I hope that you're at least a good enough politician, or a not politician, that if you're going to tell me off for whatever authoritarian thing that he does, that you give me the credit for the good things that he does too.
Oh, sure. That's fine. It's not this compromise, this tit for tat thing is not a principled outlook. Like, I have no problem with
just remember, I have no solutions, only trade-offs.
I have no problem with trade-offs that move us towards liberty without going in reverse. Like, if you give me a bill right now, or a referendum vote right now that says I will reduce property taxes in the state of Texas by $1 and in no other way increase taxes anywhere else, vote on that immediately. Sure. Baby steps, incrementalism.
Okay,
fine.
What if it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back? In other words, you lowered taxes 10% here. You had to increase taxes, 2%, 2.5% over here.
No, because I don't have the right. No. Well, hold on.
Decrease.
Go ahead.
So wait. It's overall decrease. Taxes are overall going down.
I have no just authority to increase taxes on anyone.
Wait. So you won't even take a net decrease?
No one has just authority to increase taxes on. Now, if it's like on the same class of people, like, I don't know, the same group of people are affected by both, so it is actually a net reduction, and it's not an increase on other people to decrease on these people. There's a difference there materially, but
okay.
Anyway.
But I mean, if there's a net overall cut in taxes, right? So you're going to get a 10% cut across the board tax cut for whatever reason, but 2.5% increase for the schools. So everybody's taxes are going to go down by about 7 point whatever percent, 5%. So like, it's a net overall cut, but you had to increase the school taxes on the county side of things 2.5%. And so it's like, if you could take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, that's the question: is the trade-off, is what you're getting better? Is the sandwich, the good stuff that you're going to get, is that outweigh the bad? That's the trade-off, right?
Right.
I think
I have no problem with that. As long as we're not increasing aggression on any individual and we're only reducing it, then I have no problem with that. That's fine.
It's probably not going to be the case that there's ever going to be a situation where you can't drive a car. You can't have industrial capitalism. There's no system. Somebody's going to get aggressed upon. We want to do the least amount of damage as possible. But if everything can be boiled down simply to aggression, then I don't consent to you driving a car, right? I don't consent to you polluting. I don't consent to you smoking and having to breathe in your secondhand smoke, right? So it's like, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where absolutely everyone could possibly live in a state of peace without there being some kind of a coercive or some kind of a assertive assertion upon their sovereignty. It just there are the only people who do that, by the way, who can do that, are the Amish. And I don't see libertarians going to live with the Amish. So unfortunately, because of the way our society is structured, we all have to choose elected representatives, and the elected representatives that we choose I choose are going to be the ones that are going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so that's what I see Donald Trump as. Do I agree with his bump stock ban? No. Is it going to get thrown out in court? Probably. And overall, that will mean that we'll have actually done way better than we even expected, because libertarians always point to the bump stock ban, which I loudly and vociferously opposed and still do. But at the end of the day, more people drive cars than use bump stocks.
What about when you get him elected and he drone bombs some kids in a school?
Lower gas prices. It's better, rather than look at it as an absolutist measure, it's better to have lower gas prices than to have bump stocks. If you had to make the trade-off, because life is about trade-offs, it's better to have the lower gas prices. That's not that. I wish it wasn't like that. I wish I lived in a perfect world where it wasn't either or. But I think there are, unfortunately, such things as necessary evils. And I used to not believe that, but I've changed my mind.
It's a contradiction in terms. If something's necessary, it can't be evil. And if it's evil, it can't be necessary, like by definition. Like evil implies options and you choosing the bad one. So if it's necessary, that means it can't be otherwise, which means it can't be evil. But I find that most people that use the term, these things aren't necessary.
If you're starving to death and you steal a loaf of bread, I mean, you should have to pay it back. But it's a small harm that will save your life. I don't think that we should try and justify it. But I mean, I think if a poor little child is literally starving to death and steals a loaf of bread from me, I mean, I might, if I catch him, I might make him work in the scullery scrubbing pots. But at the end of the day, small harms, like for example, driving a car, that's a harm. You're polluting. You're by any definition of the non-aggression principle, I do not consent to breathing in the fumes. This is what the left views, by the way. This is their whole carbon credit scheme, is based on this concept of, if you own a factory, I mean, how much should you be allowed to pollute?
There are answers to every single one of these challenges of the NAP, but we're not spending enough time on each individual one because you're throwing like 17 at me at once. So I can't defend any of these points. Like, if a kid steals bread from somebody, chances are the person that had the bread would have consented to giving that kid some bread in the first place. Therefore, there's no violation.
But they don't consent. They don't consent.
Then you don't steal the bread. Like, look, the point of principles is to put them above yourself. That is what being principled is. I would rather die being a good guy than live being the bad guy. Like, that is what it is to be virtuous. So be it. So be it. Die. I would rather die being the good guy.
Not everybody wants to die. Not everybody wants to die, and you also should.
Not everybody wants to be principled. Okay.
Well, yes. People when they are faced with death or principles, like principles and death, or life and compromise, they tend to choose life and compromise. And so we probably, if our philosophy forces people to choose death, it's time to reconsider your philosophy. There's got to be a way to have a philosophy that actually works with how people live in the real world. Most people, you may choose death. You may choose to die. If you expect other people to follow you down that road, it is a long and lonely road. I mean, you will be all alone on that road.
People throughout history have died for their principles. This is not as rare as you're making it out to be.
You know what? Gandhi was a little bitch. And you know what? I think that the British Empire was probably good for India. This woman got gang raped by 9 Indian men in Delhi the other day. They've got a cultural problem over there that probably would have been better off if the British had stayed with the British Raj in India and had never given up their colony. The British should have probably never given up Singapore. Look at China now moving into Hong Kong. Right? The British probably should never have given up they should have just said, you know what? We're going to protect human rights and we're going to stay right here so that communist China can't destroy the human rights of the good citizens of Hong Kong. And the trade-offs would have been better, right? The trade-off would have been that now communist China doesn't own Hong Kong and is snooping and surveilling and destroying the individual rights of the people who lived there. So it's a series of trade-offs. And Hong Kong, if they'd had a vote, I promise you Hong Kong would have voted to keep Great Britain as their protectorate rather than allow China to come in. Hong Kong did not want China to come in, and they will not fall there. If China is death in this scenario, right? And compromise is the United Kingdom staying in Hong Kong. They would have chosen Hong Kong. Now you could have said, no, the principles are that they had a 99-year lease with Hong Kong, and now the lease is up, and so the British have got to leave. And Hong Kong would have said, fuck that. Our human and individual rights outweigh that piece of paper written 99 years ago, and we decide compromise. We're going to live. We'd like to stay with the British mandate rather than allow China to come in and dominate our lives and put us on a social credit score and destroy our lives and disappear us into camps during COVID-19. So it's like, if your philosophy, leads to death, if it leads to suicide.
Did you just twist libertarian philosophy into justifying China coming in and taking Hong Kong? That is not the position at all. Look, this whole podcast, I asked you one question and we have been debating, which was not my intention. I wanted to invite you on to talk about all sorts of things, but I feel like we've just been doing, it's been fun and respectful, and I appreciate it.
You started at the beginning with the NAP. No.
I know, that was my bad. I apologize. But anyway, so I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy the challenges to the non-aggression principle. I think they're fun to think through. They're fun to work through. They challenge and refine our philosophy in doing so. I'm definitely not one of the people that gets emotional and angry about that stuff. So good on you for challenging people. That's awesome. We're getting close to time. So if hopefully you'll come back and I haven't made your life miserable for an hour, but
no, I don't care.
Is there a message that you would like to give to an anarcho-capitalist audience? Now's your chance. This is probably one of the biggest ones.
I mean, I think that I've thoroughly, pissed them off, enough by now, but I mean, it's like, read people who disagree with you, right? The first thing that I did when I was a libertarian activist in 2008, I got a job at the Libertarian National Committee. And it was such a dream job. I got to have health insurance and, back in 2008, $40,000 a year was a good salary. And so working in Washington, D.C., I loved it. I got to drive into D.C. right by the Thomas Jefferson Memorial every day. And I prayed to Thomas Jefferson. And I said, Thomas, give me strength to fight for liberty each day. And when I walked into my office at the Libertarian National Committee's headquarters, the office that they gave me had this big bookshelf full of every libertarian book. I have most of them still because they just gave them to me. They were like, oh, the person who was here last, didn't want them. Because I couldn't believe that nobody wanted these books. They're an original signed copy of a Milton Friedman book, signed in that. I'm just like on the shelves, just grabbing everything that I can, right? And I read every single piece of literature from every libertarian that had been in that office. And the party's headquarters, every book that had gone on those shelves, every presidential candidate, Harry Brown, right? Every single one that I could. When I ran for president as a libertarian, they had a trivia thing where they were quizzing us in Colorado. And they said, who was the first woman to win an electoral vote in a presidential race? I was the only one who knew. It was Tony Nathan, because I had read every single piece of literature. And I continued to read libertarian literature. But I also read Machiavelli, The Prince. And I read I read Michael Scheuer, and I'll read his books on foreign policy and his arguments on foreign policy for blowback. And I read George W. Bush decision points, and I read Dick Cheney's books. In order to understand is that we say we oppose. It's not enough to just call someone a neocon because you disagree with what they have to say. What does it actually mean? And what do they actually believe? And what is their, or have you read the philosophy of Leo Strauss? Right? You know, this morning I was listening to a lecture where someone was explaining to me the philosophy of the Marquis de Sade. And I had to admit I had never listened to the philosophy or the stories of the man who literally coined the term sadistic. Right? And where did this term sadism and sadistic, where did this come from? And why is he such a controversial figure? You know, and it's because he pointed out the dangers of love from a perspective of how it can destroy people. And I'm reading The Prince, and I read it once when I was younger, but I'm reading it from a perspective of not, people call it like a manual for tyranny, how to be a tyrant. But it was actually a manual for how good people, good leaders and rulers and politicians, people can survive, right? Because it recognizes that evil exists. And that's what I mean when I say that there are trade-offs, or when I say that I believe in such a thing as necessary evils, because it's to recognize that evil exists, evil will always exist, and if life is about trade-offs and not solutions, then you will drink the poison from the poison chalice. If you want to be a person of consequence, if you wish to be a person, to be a leader, if you wish to be politics or run for office, if you want to survive, if you don't want to have your head adorning the city gates, if you don't want to be like Ed Stark from Game of Thrones and have your head chopped off by Joffrey, if you wish to survive and you wish to have your principles, your libertarian principles, actually be enacted in your kingdom, then I suggest you read Machiavelli's The Prince. And in it is a practical handbook for survival. It's not to say that I endorse everything in that book, and you should take everything with a grain of salt. But if you can read things that you disagree with or things that you think might go against your principles, that will give you a broader perspective. It will strengthen your libertarian principles in some ways, and it might, weaken them in others. One of these things that I enjoy every week, Judge Napolitano, who I used to work for and produce his show, every week on Wednesday he comes on, and every once in a while I'll kind of spar with him, just kind of like you and I do tonight. And one of the things that, and I love the judge and we're very good friends, but one of the things I noticed about the judge is whenever we talk about military questions, right, I'll ask him questions about, well, in this scenario, or we talk about a real life military scenario, how would you sort of defend yourself in such a way? How would you do this? And he always falls back on, as a judge, on a philosophical response, right? This was an act of aggression. This person, this is the good guy. This is the bad guy. But he never gets into the question of the military tactic, like the actual tactic. And when I say tactic, I'm talking about what Sun Tzu taught in The Art of War. And, I'm a martial artist. I've been a martial artist for almost 20 years now. And there's nothing like getting punched in the face. There's nothing like committing to regular acts of violence that will teach you a lesson about things like aggression. I know a lot of libertarians who talk a big game about aggression who've never been punched in the face. And while I may not have served in the military and I may not have killed anyone, I can say for certain that violence is not as clear-cut, or aggression is not as clear-cut an issue as libertarians would like it to believe that it is. It's really not. It's and understanding tactics and actual defense tactics, applying that on an individual basis, applying that on a national basis, they can it can be muddied. But for example, libertarians will frequently complain about things like saber rattling, right? So if the United States is engaging in saber rattling, right, that a lot of libertarians might say that's aggressive. That's aggressive. Don't make those aggressive noises. Don't saber rattle. And yet, one of the most basic tactics of self-defense is to puff yourself up to look bigger than you really are, or to saber rattle, to make yourself to make a threat if you do this, then I will do this, right? To aggressively threaten violence in order to, because you perceive someone as a threat and you want to make sure that everybody knows not with you, right? These are tactics. They don't coincide with any libertarian views, but I wish more libertarians would learn more about the art of war, learn more about the prince, learn about, read books of people that disagree with you. People always laugh. I did a debate with Dave Smith about a month ago where I suggested he needed to have a few neocon friends, and he sneered at that, which I really just thought was ignorant, because he's saying, "Oh, I don't want to be friends or talk to anybody who might disagree with me. I don't want to associate with people who have different views from me, that you might learn from, that might bolster your knowledge. They'll make you a better debater, right? How do you know what you're fighting against?" So I think many libertarians are afraid to have the types of relationship with people that might make them feel impure, because we're essentially, at the end of the day, we're really just a club to some extent. We're a cult, right? And to really be free, to really think freely, is to say, I'm willing to admit I could be wrong about things. I could be wrong about everything I believe, and I'm willing to re-examine them. And here's what nobody's willing to do. Almost nobody. Are you willing to change your mind if evidence proves that you were wrong? Yeah, if you're truly brave, if you're truly courageous, consider learning something new that might potentially prove you wrong. Read things that you disagree with, because it will make you because if you're truly right, you have nothing to fear.
Yes.
Right? From learning from people who disagree with you.
We've done hours of content in the last month on this channel about having epistemic humility, about challenging your own beliefs more than you challenge other people's beliefs, because the likelihood that you're wrong about something is high if you don't challenge your own beliefs. Almost everything you just said, I absolutely agree. Go get punched in the face. Go learn how to defend yourself. Go read people you disagree with. Relish people that are willing to pay you the respect of challenging your beliefs. Those are people showing you real respect, like taking time out of your life. Perfect example. You've taken time out of your life today to challenge some of my beliefs. I hope I provided a good conversation, a good pushback in the other direction. Austin, sure. Thank you so much for joining me for an hour. I hope we can do this many more times. This has been very fun for me. I hope it wasn't too harrowing for you.
No,
I'll give you the
stuff, and maybe I'll have you on my show sometime.
I'd be happy to. Let people know where they can find your content, and I'll make sure and get the links in the description.
Sure. Rumble.com/AP for Liberty is the number 4. And AP for Liberty on Rumble is the Wake Up America show, streams live every Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time. And highly recommend that you guys, especially if you're a big fan of Javier Milei, check out my AP for Liberty shop, merch shop. And Javier Milei has taken a big liking to it. He's been sharing my stuff around. We made international news. Argentina's newspapers are publishing about Javier Milei's sneakers that come from my shop. So check out all our cool Javier Milei merch at apforlibertyshop.com, and just keep on rocking in the free world, man.
Awesome. You do have some cool merch. Definitely people should go check it out. Everybody, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Peace, love, and anarchy.